And I'm really excited and honored to be here with you tonight, this afternoon, to talk about the future of international organizations, reform or decline. And in this regard, I have some preliminary thoughts I want to quickly share with you all, because I believe it's important to realize where we are. As we share a common hobby of spending our days here in these halls, you probably know that Vienna is the central hub to over 50 international organizations, which also means that Vienna is one of the heart places of international diplomacy worldwide. And today we want to talk and deliberate about the role of these institutions, because there has been a shift happening. And we could also feel that to some extent in Vienna. It's the question about the Vienna spirit, so the so-called consensus-based approach towards policy decision-making. It's questions about blocking each other's agendas and way forward. And it's deliberations on how we can move forward and ensure that the policies and international organizations actually deliver to the world's greatest crisis nowadays. So we pose the question between reinvigoration or redundancy. What role should international organizations play in the current world order? And as you can see, thankfully it's not just me sharing my thoughts on this, but we have a very distinguished panel here with us today, whom I'm very excited to invite one after the other. And I would kindly ask you to please wait with a thunderous applause till I've introduced all of them before you can give it. There have been some shifts involved into this panel and lineup, so we're really really thankful to have Ms. Zakharova here with us. But the panel was originally planned with a more gender-diverse perspective in mind. That being said, I now have the pleasure to welcome you, Ms. Zakharova, who is a political scientist and specializing in strategic geopolitics. She has her own consultancy company, Face for a Conscious Experience, and she is a scientific advisor to the European Forum Altbach, which I found very interesting because a lot of you certainly applied there. Apart from that, she has been the director of the Austrian Institute for European Security Policy, and she's an expert to the Ministry of Defense Scientific Commission. Then, all the way to the left, we have our dean of this very halls, Professor Markus Kornprobst, who's a leading expert, as you know, in international relations, especially in diplomacy, peace and security, and international relation theory. He researched and taught at the Ohio State University, at the Oxford University, and he has published and edited over 8 books. A lot of you here at the DA know the Handbook of Austrian Foreign Policy, so small flex here. Apart from that, we also have the great pleasure to welcome the Deputy Head of Mission, Zoilo Velasco here. He is the Consul General and the Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN Republic of Philippines. And he has previously been the Director of the Maritime and Ocean Affairs Office and stationed in The Hague as the First Secretary for Consul and Legal Advice. Apart from that, and last by no means least, we have Billy Badwe here with us. He's a program officer at the UN Office for Drugs and Crime, responsible for transnational organized crime projects, and a founder of multiple initiatives, amongst them the United for Education Sustainable Futures Initiative, the founder of International Security and Conflict Analysis Framework, and a co-founder of the Regional Academy of the UN. And as we have now done this successfully, a great round of applause, please, for a distinguished panel. And for me. And before really going deep into these deliberations today, I have the great pleasure to also announce that we have been sent a video from Her Excellency Ghada Waly, who's the director of the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, the executive director and the director of the UN Office of Vienna.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address the 2025 edition of the Diplomatic Academy Students' Initiative Conference. For over 250 years, the Diplomatic Academy has helped shape Austria's diplomatic heritage, from the Habsburg Empire to the modern era. And while the principles of diplomacy remain unchanged, the world in which they are practiced is changing dramatically. Today, we face the immense global challenges of conflict, climate change, poverty, inequality, and new risks posed by emerging technologies. These challenges have led some to question whether diplomacy can still deliver. Yet, it is exactly in times of crisis that diplomacy is needed most. The UN in Vienna provides countries with a vital space to come together, negotiate, and find common ground. From promoting the peaceful uses of nuclear energy in outer space to advancing industrial development and strengthening global cooperation against organized crime, our work speaks to the importance of diplomacy. This year also marks 80 years of the United Nations founding and 70 years of Austria's membership in the organization. These milestones remind us of the enduring power of diplomacy and Austria's long-standing commitment to multilateralism and dialogue. And it is through forums like this conference that these values come to life. By bringing people together to exchange ideas, challenge perspectives, and seek solutions, we reinforce the very essence of diplomacy. So I encourage you to fully engage in discussions, learn from one another, and help us shape a more peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Her Excellency. To start off the conversation here, I think it would be very nice to take upon one of the things that Her Excellency has been pointing out, and that's a shift also in regards to new problems emerging. So I would like to start off with you, Professor Kornprobst, with asking you, whilst it is uncommon that there is a purely unilateral approach to crisis, we have seen more and more that there is a shift in the relevance of international organizations, and this becomes very observable when it comes to norm contestation beyond what is normally seen in these forums. How would you perceive this shift of relevance? Has there been such? And if you put your finger on this situation, how would you in the end see this as a normal form of contestation or a deep one which requires new avenues and forms of dealing with?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, yeah, and I definitely think it's a deep contestation, yeah. Because if we think about it, so norm of territorial integrity, for instance, that is something that we really took for granted for a while, yeah? I mean, this thing is not working really well. I'll do it like that. I think it's better like that. It's too close to me. Yeah, that's okay to me. So it really is a deep contestation. So example, territorial integrity. Yeah? So we have an old style war of territorial conquest, not that far away from here. We have fantasies by an American president about Greenland, about Canada, about the Panama Canal. We have China being quite outspoken about its territorial claims in the South China Sea and Taiwan and all of that. So territorial integrity was really a pillar of international order, yeah? And that seems to have weakened. If we look at the OSCE here, which obviously is also an important organization, then that was basically built in order to guarantee the inviolability of borders. That was formulated. Yeah? So I think this is the one thing. So it's the pillars of international order. They have been shaken. And then on top of that, obviously, there is contestation about all kinds of other norms as well. Yeah. So to what extent, for instance, should the international community do something about states that do wrong within their own boundaries? Yeah? Sovereignty. Is that the right to do wrong within your own boundaries, or is there something that is supposed to hold you back? This is probably a battle that for the time being, responsibility to protect and all has been lost. Yeah. So this would be so I think there are really two levels, two layers of contestation, and some really concern the pillars of international order, and others simply continue kind of contestation that we've had. One could go on and on now about these examples. Yeah. At the same time, and I do agree with what we have just heard in the introductory remarks. we should beware of simply saying that we are in dire straits and we are in a big crisis. Multilateralism can still accomplish something, yeah? So I always thought this pandemic treaty would be something that's very, very important. And then I thought for a long time that it's something that could be accomplished, but it was accomplished. It's not accomplished yet, but we are moving into the right direction there. The Pact for the Future, perhaps we'll discuss that a little bit today as well, 2024. There are probably all kinds of problems with it. It's very long. It's a basically Christmas tree. It's a wish list and then all of that. But nevertheless, yeah. So we have this pact and we have something to build it on. Yeah. So while these really are very difficult times in which even the pillars of international order have been shaken, we should not be too pessimistic in terms of our outlook into the future either.
Thanks so much. Absolutely. Yeah, I think especially touching upon the responsibility to protect as a concrete example of where some battles unfortunately appear to be at least postponed. But the INB negotiations with a pandemic treaty are some of them where I would have to say it's interesting to see that norms not only need to be written down, but the question is how we then in the end start to apply them and really make use of them. And I think here, Ms. Chakarova, I would really like to get your perspective on it, because I believe that the one criticism one always holds against international organizations is that unfortunately after decades of their implementation, where is the light at the end of the tunnel, or to what extent has their implementation or their work really benefited. So if we look at all of the different amounts of crises we've been discussing today, where is the performance of the international organizations in that? And I think especially you as a geopolitical expert in the peace and security field, it becomes blatantly aware to all of us that we now live in the times with the most amount of conflicts since the end of the World War. So I pose this question to you in regards to what is the current role of international organizations in regards to these crises?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be on a Friday afternoon with so many young people who certainly have better things to do on a Friday afternoon than listening to this for adults here in the room, who also apparently won't have a lot of good news when it comes to geopolitics, global geopolitics and international organizations. Sorry, and I have to warn you on my side, I also don't have a lot of good news, but still, my personal appreciation for you to take the time and listen to us means a lot. And let me just give you a very, very short wrap-up of the way how I analyze the current situation. Now, if we take the international organizations as a full package, post-Second World War up until today, like we have 80 years of institutional legacy. A lot of these international institutions have been transformed, modernized, but have sustained the test of time, right? And we have heard a lot about the way how international organizations, specifically in the field of security, would not kind of be able to sustain the most urgent challenges of their time. Again and again, I can assure you, even when I was a student of international relations, some 30 years ago, we had this debate. Think of the Balkan Wars at that time, collapse of Soviet Union, Balkan Wars. Then we had the situation in Rwanda. In the 90s, it was really, really precarious time, and I can assure you, it's over with international organizations. They cannot deliver. They cannot provide the most adequate solutions to our most urgent problems. And here we are. They are still here, and they are still offering a platform. And yes, I can start the conversation from the perspective that we are living in the most precarious, geopolitically precarious time, where the international organizations, think of the UN Security Council, think of the most relevant, actually, organizations in every single socioeconomic network, have become an arena for global power competition and have been bifurcated because of Western versus non-Western. And I wouldn't even say anti-Western, just non-Western perspectives, which means that on the one hand, we are having now a rise of a lot of regional organizations, and my colleagues will be addressing this for sure, who are now in the need of addressing issues that are not linked necessarily to the way how the West and the West as a collective actor addresses problems and solves problems, because they have other understanding and perception. And then, of course, the West in itself is also in a sort of crisis and is trying to come up with an adequate solution to that. Now, UN Security Council, when I said, I think it's the most important platform, institutional platform when it comes to international security, is absolutely bifurcated. We have two blocks there, China, Russia on the one hand, and US, UK, France on the other. Right now with Trump 2.0, there is a kind of signal that US might be siding with Russia on some voting, think of the General Assembly, because of the relaunch of a strategic dialogue. But certainly this bifurcation is here to stay and is going to affect global problem solving. Now, you said yourself, right now 2025 marks the highest number of military conflicts and wars around the world compared to the end of the Second World War. So that means that nations, and that means state actors and international organizations, do not deliver. But at the same time, we, and this is my personal observation, are living also in the most vibrant time for international and regional organizations. As the international institutions do not deliver in the field of security and defense, so we are seeing a rise of regional organizations that try to solve some of the problems. Now, if we say the UN is not functioning, this is not correct, because think of the mediation of the United Nations during the food crisis, when practically, because of the UN and the mediation of Turkey, we came up with a preliminary and, transitionary settlement between Ukraine and Russia for the food. So we have, and then of course we have also the World Food Program that has been also delivering problem solving to the dire situation when it comes to food commodities. So I wouldn't go for generalization. The global picture, the helicopter view, is clearly not good, and I think that this intensification will continue. But at the same time, this gridlock that is currently existent at the level of international organizations is kind of being transition into regional problem solving, and that is why I would point to one organization particularly, that is the G20, which is currently trying to kind of rise as the new, I would argue, international platform, where you have different views. So you have the European Union and the African Union as two institutional actors. You have the 20 most, quickest economies in the world right now, fastest growing economies in the world right now, and you have the key players. And I would argue that right now, this is one interesting organization that we can discuss how it is trying to navigate the complexity of global geopolitics.
Thanks so much for this very comprehensive answer already. Yeah, I think the one thing you picked up upon the deadlock of the Security Council and the shift in this regard of the regionalization is something that I would actually like to pose a bit towards Mr. Deputy Velasco, because your country, the Republic of the Philippines, is currently running for the Security Council for the term 2027 to 2028. How would you, as a country from the so-called Global South, see that Security Council, and what do you promise yourself from the not just the application but then your membership?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, to be part of this very noble panel, and also to be able to share my views. Just a caveat though, I'm from the government, but my views do not necessarily represent my country, but then I assure you that it will be based on my diplomatic practice. So the Philippines is vying to become a member of the UN Security Council, and it has many layers in it, and the most basic premise of that is basically on what we call the three constants. Amidst all of these global shifts, specifically in Indo-Pacific. And the three constants that we always hang on to are, first, the sovereign equality of all states. It's basic. In UN Charter, every state, whether big or small, are equal. Second, for us, in our region, it's the centrality of ASEAN. And there's a discussion about regional groups. And for us, because we are small states, small countries, we have better voice if we are together as a group, as an ASEAN group. And the third, for us, it's really multilateralism. It will always remain for us, especially for us small, medium-sized states. There's also the basic metric of regionalism, bonding together, and that is multilateralism basically in the grander scale. So all these three constants, that is the basic premise of our bid for UN Security Council. Why? Because we believe that every state, whether you're small or big, has a right to push for a rules-based international order. And we can see, for example, Slovenia, a small country, but it's very active in the UN Security Council in pushing for the agenda towards upholding the rules, the rule of law. And that's basically what the Philippines wants to be, to put on the table in the UN Security Council. So we package ourselves as a bridge builder. That is our banner in bringing our candidature in the UN Security Council. So it is important for us as well because, as you know, the Philippines has a dispute with our bigger neighbor, territorial and maritime dispute. These are two conflicts. The maritime dispute has already been settled in an arbitration award by a tribunal in The Hague. And of course, China doesn't recognize that arbitral award, but for us, it's an outcome of a rules-based process, which is dispute settlement mechanism under UNCLOS. So it is important for us to uphold all the time the rules-based international order, and that is why we go back to the UN Charter, UNCLOS, the Manila Declaration on Dispute Settlement of these international disputes. All of these come together, and in a way, it is a package that wraps around our bid for membership in the Security Council.
Thank you so much. I think if I had a vote or say in this, you would have just convinced someone. But apart from that, thank you for that alignment. And I think this goes very well into into a question which I would have for you, Billy. And it would be in this regard. If multilateralism is held as a constant, but the UN across all three pillars experiences the severity of crisis increasing, is there a crisis of deliverance, or is there a challenge in some of the relationships amongst members and upholding their commitments that they have done within the framework of the United Nations to and amongst each other?
Thank you very much, Marvin. Can you?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
working. It's working. That's the first task, to get the mic working. I managed to do it. You didn't manage, Marcos. It's one for me. One for me. No, thanks so much for that question, and also it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be here to interact with you today and on this very important topic. So let me just start with a side note, okay? Quite often when I interact on topics like this related to security and United Nations, colleagues ask me, Billy, why do you actually work for the United Nations, an organization that failed your country so miserably? You mentioned already Rwanda. For those of you who do not know, I come from Rwanda, and I left during the genocide. So I get this question quite often. And there, and my answer is always, imagine the world without the United Nations. Just imagine the world without the United Nations. And I have to say that it might be surprising for you. Usually sometimes when we think about the United Nations, or when people think about the United Nations, they think about peace and peacemaking and peacekeeping. Okay, that's fine. But for me, I think the question speaks to whether the UN is going through crisis, or whether the UN is experiencing crisis situation with its membership. I have to say that my understanding of the United Nations is that it's a crisis organization. So it's always in a crisis, okay? Without the crisis, there's probably no point of the United Nations. And given that the United Nations is a member states-based organization, and the crises that we face are usually happening either within countries or amongst countries, and our job is to facilitate the peace, the negotiations, the mediation, and the resolving of conflicts that we see around the world. Obviously, we are every day in conflict of with those member states, every day. I've been now with the UN for about 9.5 years. It doesn't sound a lot, but I can tell you it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. When you're sitting in rooms with member states every day for 9.5 years, it's a lot of time. And you get to see a lot of things, and you get to understand many things. And many things you don't understand, by the way. You really do not understand. Is there a comma here? Is it supposed to be a shar or should or whatever? You get to see many things. You get to understand many things. And then you get to understand that these things actually matter. And you also get to understand why they have to insist on that comma. Because they have to think about, you talked about sovereignty. They have to think about what does this mean in our own context back home. So we agree on this here in Vienna or in New York. We have to go back home and put it in practice. So what does it mean? That comma is actually very important. Okay? And many of those commas, what have they brought us? The Sustainable Development Goals, for sure. Think about, when we talk about the issues that we might have on development, Sustainable Development Goals, this is a very important agenda that we now have, which is, by the way, not a UN agenda. It's not just your country's agenda, but it's your agenda as well. How many of you care about the environment? How many of you care about gender equality? How many of you care about education? It's your agenda as well. That's just an example. So, of course, we are experiencing authoritarianism. We know that. Nationalism is growing everywhere. So human rights is under attack. And therefore, there is crisis there as well. But that's where, as my executive director already mentioned at the beginning, that's where you need the United Nations most. Yes? As a source of hope, as a custodian for peace, and for sure, as an institution that is there to at least diffuse the chaos that we are seeing. So I submit to you that I agree with the fact that the UN is undergoing crisis, and it's in constant crisis with its member states. But this is the nature of the United Nations. That's not necessarily a positive view of the organization, But that's the role of the organization. This is why the United Nations is there. And Dag Hammarskjöld himself, one of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, said very, very best that the UN was not created to get us into heavens. It was created to save us from chaos. And I think this is what we try to do, and this is what the organization tries to do every day. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Billy. Yeah, I think it's a round of applause. Is already due after this first round of answers. Both given, I think, their inspiring effect. I'm happy to say that the final panel, at least in me, invokes a feeling of hopefulness and working towards against these crises, which we have discussed throughout all of the day. But I think now I want to go a bit more into the detail of how we can frame this all, make sense of this all. We have already discussed some of the fundamental causes of this shift away of the importance of IOs, or towards a shift of new international organizations. And this is why I would again address the question to you, and would really, really be interested in you explaining on the point you made earlier, Ms. Chakarova, especially in regards to the G20. Because the first criticism which might be faced by someone is this then not just a development of a new framework, which again includes a big custodian and the great power state, and to what extent is again an international organization just as useful as the big power state in it lets it out to be?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing we need to understand is that there is supremacy of power politics over decision-making coming from international and regional institutions. This is just the natural order of things. This is the natural hierarchy of the way how world affairs and international relations are shaped, made, and happening. And that means that in phases like this one, where you have a very intense phase of global power competition, and then, as we've already heard, this global power competition is going through different regional dimensions. The Indo-Pacific is going to be, unfortunately, the hottest of all geopolitical, and sorry for the bad news, the hottest of the geopolitical hotspots. There will be a lot of crises and military conflicts also, fortunately, in Africa, and the the Middle East is still absolutely on fire, and at the same time, the Russian war against Ukraine is by far the largest systemic risk, on par with, when I say systemic risk, this is not just a geopolitical risk for you to understand, it's a systemic risk on par with the great financial crisis and with the pandemic. That means that it has second and third order events that have been unleashed and that had contagious effect after the launch of the war. Coming back to your question about G20, because G20 is not the only platform, I want to look at it as a kind of a transactional nature of newly emerging regional formats. As international norms are being influenced and being shaped by state actors' behavior, so there is this need for a kind of transitionary nature of decision-making that is also backed by institutions. So G20 is one of many right now. I just gave one example for lack of time, to be honest with you. But in the Indo-Pacific, we have also, for instance, the quadrilateral format. Again, it's not an organization in the traditional conservative way of our understanding of emergence of organizations. You have AUKUS, which is, again, another perfect example for that. Then you have Shanghai Organization for Cooperation. You have the still, to some extent, functioning Organization for Collective Security under the Russian umbrella, covering Central Asian republics and former Soviet republics. So basically, my point here is that there is a lot happening And when I say a lot happening, I mean political meetings, which are steered by global powers' interests. And of course, a lot of regional actors are currently navigating between them. They are oscillating and trying to somehow avoid being caught in any kind of binary decision. And when I said G20, it's more or less an antithesis to the G7 world of the again, it's not anti-Western, but it's a kind of non-Western antithesis to the G7 world, which is the club of the richest. Because as we speak, we know for a fact that China is meanwhile the second global economy in the world, and we know for a fact that India is projected to become world economic power number 3, and there is a misrepresentation. There is a kind of mismatch between the original design of the existent, mostly Western influenced and Western steered organizations and the emerging formats that are representing interests of huge economies. I mean, even if we consider, I remember this statement coming from China about Philippines being this little dwarf or something like that. Yeah. And if you compare, I mean, if you look at the scale of size and economy in Southeast Asia and compare it to European states, you don't have any example that is adequate, even in terms of size of population. So my point here is that this is an inevitable phenomenon. We cannot stop it from happening. It is just reflecting the speed and the scale and scope of changes in the world of geopolitics and geoeconomics and institutions currently, and same goes for political decision makers, by the way. They're just running after this dramatic shift and are trying to kind of adapt to this reality. So to answer your question, there is a lot of power politics there. Think of the joint declarations where the one power, for instance, Russia has been fighting for a certain narrative to be removed from the joint declaration, right? And then there was a backing coming from China. And then, for instance, while India was hosting the G20 in 2023, they were trying to somehow mediate. But this is normal. This is the normal modus operandi of all international organizations. We know for a fact that the traditional international institutions are having the same problem when it comes to the way how member states are trying to have an impact on a certain resolution. This is nothing new. It's only that we are going to see much bigger intensity, many more voices, and now here is the good news. This means also more optionality. It's going to become much more diverse in terms of problem solving, in terms of voices, in terms of perspectives. So the Global South, which the West doesn't like as a narrative, but apparently Global South countries don't have zero problem with the brand, is entering the space and is going to look for all the possibilities to attend these formats, to transform these formats, and to, to have their own say in the way how international system is going to be shaped in the 21st century. It's inevitable to happen. And in that sense, I would say it only depends on the flexibility of decision makers and the adaptability of the existing international organizations to embrace this change.
Again, what a comprehensive answer, and I think it's a really, really good thing, I think, to think about international organizations not as a construct being set in place, but in the flexibility of new creation. And that's why I would very much like to get your professor's point of view also on the systemic changes you feel are currently happening, and also if this then leads to the norms which have been set in the framework of past international organizations to be done redundant, or if they will be adhered to. And I think very, very deep norms such as the fundamental declarations of human rights would be something where I would be interested if you see that flexibility would be required also in this regard, or if this is something that at least all all countries have to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thanks, Marvin. No, I think if we look at international order today, then there are basically 3 dimensions, and they're in conflict with one another. Yeah? So the one is multiplexity, the second one is multipolarity, and the third one is international rule of law. So just a few words about everyone, and apologies if there is some overlap with my last talk there earlier this week. So multiplexity means that there's a lot of agency in international regions. Yeah. So India, for instance, that's an example there. So if you look at Asia Pacific, then that is a region where there's actually a considerable amount of agency in the region. So it's not a great power or something like that can simply superimpose whatever it wants to do, but there's agency in the regions. Europe is another case, clearly, where there's agency in a region. There are also some cases where this is not the case at all. Yeah? So Horn of Africa, for instance, is very much on the receiving end of what happens in adjacent regions or what happens amongst the great powers. So I think that's the one story. The other story is the multipolarity. Multipolarity, if we look at it, probably we have 3 great powers, we have more rising powers, and they obviously are in competition with one another, yeah? And that provides some agency to smaller states, yeah? So many African states, they pursue a hedging strategy. So states like Kenya, for instance, they just cooperate basically with every of those great powers, trying to make the most out of this. And stuck somewhere in the middle of all of that is the international rule of law, yeah. But it's very much connected to all of that. So if we look at the United Nations, then obviously the Security Council is supposed to be the guardian of the international order ultimately, yeah. But the guardians, especially the 3 great powers that I've just mentioned, they don't guard much of this international order right now. Yeah? So we have this funny and actually historically quite unique situation where the United States, which basically built the international order that we see today with the United Nations, Bretton Woods institutions and all of that, moves against its own order. It moves against the order that it once created. Yeah? That's not what one usually expects. Yeah? One usually expects, okay, there's a rising power, and the rising power then does something to the international order. But at the moment, it's actually the builder, the erstwhile builder of that order that moves against it. But if the guardians of the international order don't take care of it, yeah, then obviously the international order has a massive problem, yeah. And then within international regions, it sometimes depends on the region, but it's sometimes not all that different either, yeah. So if one looks at the Middle East now, if one looks at the Horn of Africa, if one looks at those regions where there really are a lot of conflicts, then the regional organizations, they can't do much. This is something that really worries me. So if we look at the crises today, then one would think, okay, there are some very clear-cut candidates that should actually take care of those crises. Yeah. So in the past, the United Nations was an important mediator in major crises. Yeah? So it doesn't matter whether we look at the Cuban Missile Crisis or we look at the Balkan Wars in the 1990s. Something. So the United Nations played a very important role. At the moment, it's quite sidelined from all of that, and the same applies to regional organizations. And one more thing about that, so about the geopolitics part. Yeah? So yes, there is plenty of geopolitics going on now. Yeah? But geopolitics waxes and wanes, of course. Yeah? Geopolitics is something that's in the minds of decision makers. Yeah? There's not something objective or something. It's in the minds of decision makers. So geopolitics as a term originates in the late 19th century. Yeah? Mackinder, Ratzel, and others. And that obviously had fairly immediate political effects. Yeah? So the scramble for Africa, for instance, is underwritten by these geopolitical ideas. And geopolitical ideas, they never went away entirely, certainly not. Yeah? But there were times when they were much, much weaker than now, and they have come back with a vengeance. Yeah? So is obviously the belief in multilateralism and the belief that standing together, cooperating together, you can manage a crisis, co-manage a crisis. Yeah? That ultimately is also in the minds of people. And then you can design whatever institutions you want, and you can have fantastic ideas about how to revamp the United Nations and everything. But if there's basically the standard operating procedure of this international organization, the standard operating platform, is not there, yeah? So the kind of ideational resource that you need in order to make it run, then it's a problem. And I think that is where we are at the moment.
Wow, also quite a drastic or quite a good view on I think the current reformation efforts which we see in the United Nations, and I think this is why I would really like to turn to you now, Billy Bourgeois. In regards to especially how you view the Pact of the Future. I mean, we have been already talking about the importance of the Security Council as a guarantor. We've been talking about the importance of actually acting on the norms from member state sides for the norms to be valuable. And we have now seen that there was some progress in the Pact of the Future made. We have the strongest language on Security Council reform in the last 30 years. But is that enough? And what kind of actions have been already taken since this pact has been adopted at the end of 2024? Would be my question to you now.
Thanks so much, Marvin, for that. And I think it's good that we're kind of moving from the pessimistic start of the discussion into more, hopefully, optimistic, futuristic conversation. And I think the Pact for the Future is indeed one of those instruments that we now have in place that has taken quite a lot of programming, quite a lot of energy, a lot of resources on the part of the UN. But also, I understand, as you've been also, I think, following this process for quite some time, and maybe some of you, has been also very consultative in a way that it has also involved young people in listening to them, civil society organizations, the private sector, in really crafting that Pact for the Future. Of course, again, this is yet another UN document, right? Okay, so you can look at the Pact for the Future, and by the way, the name is great. They know how to choose good names. The name is amazing. So when you look into it, and if you're a young person, you might find things that are really interesting for you when you think about future generations and how we need to live today, keeping in mind about those who are still to come, those of you who are here, of course, the younger ones, but also those who are not yet here. This is a very important aspect. We're also looking at technologies and how we can use AI and other technologies to make our lives better, but also to make sure that we have governance around it, because otherwise we don't want it to spill over and get out of control. This is very important. So I think moving forward, I think what is very interesting for the Pact for the Future is the aspect of localization of the actions that come out of that have come out of the Pact for the Future. And this is going to be very critical, because I think this also means, again, that you as young people, even those of you who are not so young anymore, I used to be very young, that we have a role also in implementation of the Pact for the Future, and this is going to be quite critical. There's a task force, as you know already, that is looking into how the Pact for the Future is to be implemented. It's very much tied to the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, that are up for review in just about 5 years. And just to mention also that you might not be aware of this, but within the UN, in the framework of the 8th years anniversary of the United Nations, the Secretary General has launched a new initiative called UNODC. And this initiative is looking very specifically on how can we reform the organization. And I know you can say we've been talking about reforms for decades and nothing has happened, and you are right, of course. But I think we have a good opportunity also in the context of this crisis, because you always have to see, to take the opportunity of a crisis maybe to create opportunities. And I think this is what the Secretary General is doing. With the crisis that we have, the funding crisis as a result of the US cuts everywhere, I think it's a good opportunity to look at the organization to see how can we be more effective as an organization? How can we cut on bureaucracies? How can we reduce costs? The UN is a very expensive body. It's a very expensive organization. But does it have to be that way? It's an important organization, but does it have to be that expensive? So I think this too, the Pact for the Future and its focus on localization of the actions is quite key. And the UNODC, the Secretary General's new effort, is going to be very important as we're moving forward, as it's looking inward into the organization on how we can deliver better, being more efficient as well.
Thank you so much. Now, I really like the thought of crisis, if crisis take opportunity. And I think this is where I would pose the last question before we finally go to the audience Q&A. I think all of you are really also looking forward to, is to you, Mr. Deputy Velasco, this Vienna spirit that we've been talking about, this finding compromise, this taking a step towards each other, might be in danger, but do you see an opportunity to reinvigorate it? How would you do it, and what kind of framework would be needed?
Okay. So to answer to that, I would like first to tie together all the things that I've heard. And I've heard about agency. I've heard about the UN, of course, in its work in pushing forward with the Pact of the Future. I've heard about great power competition. For us, for the Philippines, for example, we do not ascribe to the thought, to the view that everything that happens in the international community is dictated by just two powers, by just the great powers, because in a way it denigrates the agency of all the other 190 plus states that are also actors in the international community. It would be a very sad world when you have 100 plus, almost 200 states, and only 2 countries would be the one that would be determining the future, the path that we would take. That is a very sad world that we will be living in. But for us, every state, and it goes back again to what I've been discussing about sovereign equality of all states, every state has their agency. They do things because they have their own interests, because they have their own aspirations, and that is the background, that is the springboard by which they interact with other states. And let me give you some example. For example, the Philippines, when it brought China to arbitration, many were saying it was because it was prodded by the US, coming from a great power competition mindset. But no, the legal theory behind the arbitration that we brought was basically came from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself. We developed the legal theory, and that one is something that nobody had thought of. And if you read the arbitral award, it's very revolutionary in the way it tried to resolve the dispute. Other states, when the great powers come to a locking horns situation, or in a way, for example, shying away from the legal order that they've created. Of course, other states would try to navigate, but they navigate because they have interests, and small states have due interests, and they push for it. For example, small island states who are very much affected by climate change, we all know that the bigger states don't want to move in the climate action, in climate agenda, but smaller island states do try to move the agenda forward. How? It was them, the small island states, that gathered everyone in the UN so that a general, a UNGA resolution be passed asking the ICJ to to deliver an advisory opinion on the international obligation of states with regard to climate change. And this happened already in ITLOS, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. There's a commission for small island states, which basically also led the charge in asking the ITLOS to render an advisory opinion on the legal obligation of states to protect and preserve the marine environment from the harsh effects of greenhouse gas emission. There's already an advisory opinion on that. And it was pushed by states that you would think, do not matter in the greater scheme of great power competition. So that's the point that I'm trying. So, and it goes into now the value of multilateralism, because that is basically the idea of United Nations. Every state is equal, and every state has a voice. And it is small islands, small states, medium states, who will be able to push forward an agenda. So climate action, addressing the threats of new technologies, AI, all of this will move, not because you have two great powers who have interest in this, but it's because many other countries have their own interests, so that they may be able to develop technologies, may be able to have access to technologies, so that they may be able to support their own economic development. So going now to Vienna spirit. So indeed, there's been challenges in the international organizations in Vienna, and the Vienna-based organizations, as we call them, is because the IOs here in Vienna are supposed to be technical, and they have very technical mandates, UNODC, IAEA, but as there are certain countries who try to inject some agenda, political agenda, in these discussions, whether it's Palestine, whether it's about gender, ideology, whether it's about Russia, Ukraine, would go into UNODC discussions, which in a way derails the consensus. We've seen that in a couple of, in past years, but going back again to what I say, the agency of the states within these international organizations, many states are pushing back. And groups of countries like G77, although there's also some inconsistencies in the position there, but there is now a general sense here in Vienna that there's a need to revive the Vienna spirit. And I was just in a negotiation earlier in UNIDO, and there, we were negotiating a G77 statement with regard to, because there will be a meeting next week, and there was a real sense among the states that we should be able to go back again, agree by consensus on the statement, and be able to deliver. So there might have been proof that Vienna spirit has unraveled in the past years, but there's also proof that states are want to revive Vienna spirit, because it pretty much affirms their importance to be able to come to a consensus and push the agenda, especially, for example, the global south, the developing countries.
The question is whether we need the Vienna spirit. Do we need the Vienna spirit anymore?
No, we need the Vienna spirit. We all need consensus. So.
Okay, perfect, so much. I think we have, with this, very much outlined the complexity of the international organization sphere we are all entering in. And we're unfortunately running out of time, but we have been granted some extension. So I would kindly invite the floor now, if there are any questions, and I see the first hand going up, to please share with us, please.
I have a question for Mrs. Chakarova. You have delved into the relationship between China and Russia, even giving it its own name. And I wanted to ask, what impact does that have on the West, and especially on the organizations, and how can they react, and especially to what extent can they react to it?
Thanks so much. Before letting you answer, we'll take some more questions just to ensure that we can answer a lot of participants. Perfect. Yeah, please. Thank you, Astrid.
Hi, thank you again for all of your insights. Actually, my question is really related to the last one. I want to talk about Tuvalu, because there is research shows that these islands will not exist in 30 years, and we have the issue of what to do with these people. And as the UN, I think, is also concerned with what a state actually is, etc. I would be really interested in your answer on how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the problem? How do we guard those people? And what is your idea? Thank you.
Thanks so much. And the woman right behind her, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. It's very close to my heart because I myself worked for the United Nations for 20 years. At that time, UNIDO was part of the UN. And my main point is whether we regard the UN as the guardian of peace or the world's policeman, what real power does it have, if I may use this term, to punish offenders? When we hear about a terrible attack or something has happened in the world, the UN condemns. Nothing else seems to happen after that. Maybe sanctions, but that's more or less as far as it goes. That's the first question, the first point. The second point is, I think basically that the international organizations face two problems. One is financial, because of course they're dependent on the member states. If a member state withdraws, as happened at UNIDO many years ago, the Americans withdrew, then the Australians withdrew, and that left us in a bad situation. The second thing is that many of these organizations are not well enough known. The public doesn't seem to be aware of what they really do. And this was very true at that time of UNIDO. And I personally remember going to a meeting where I suggested that to make UNIDO better known, we go to schools, we give lectures at universities, we visit clubs, etc. When I got back to my office, I found I was being put on a committee to organize all that. So this is my basic point. At that time, no one seemed to know what UNIDO did. And I think it's very true of other organizations. So maybe the awareness should be stepped up. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I think one final question, maybe maybe the lady in black.
Thank you very much for the discussion. My question concerns the future of the P5 in particular, because this group is not really reflecting anymore the current power situation of the world. For example, India is clearly claiming a seat for itself, and therefore, if there is this tension between the members of the P5 and the actual power citizens of the world, and because of this tension, the recognition of the P5 itself will eventually fade, or it is going to be expanded, or there is going to be a new, for example, umbrella organization which is incorporating those smaller multilateral organizations that are emerging right now, coming from ASEAN, Mercosur, or whatever, or the BRICS. So what is going to happen to the P5 given this current situation compared to 46? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think by some lucky charm or coincidence or greater planning, we might have a question for each panelist at this point. So maybe because that was directed towards you, Ms. Charadkovna, would you like to outline and answer the question in regards to China and Russia relations and the West? And unfortunately, because we're over time, I would kindly ask you to be short, even though these questions are really complex to understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was hoping that this question won't come from the audience. When I was addressing some of the issues under the umbrella of bifurcation, and that is by far not multipolarity. So it doesn't refer specifically only to the polarization of the system. It refers to all three layers that my colleague outlined. It refers to the agency. It refers to the topics, to the content of international politics. And basically I argue, and I've been arguing for the last 10 years, that basically one of the biggest mistakes or perception probably in terms of the scholar and academia on the one side, and also in terms of the decision makers on the other side when they are reflecting on the reality of international relations, is to not admit to the possibility of a modus operandi of strategic coordination between China and Russia for the sake of shaping the global order based on their understanding, their perception of reality, their understanding, not just for the sake of creating counterweight to the American global power projection. Of course, this is at the core of it, to have something that is equal in scope, in size, in effect, and because neither China nor Russia are able to do it on their own, so they decided to kind of organically create top-down modus operandi for the last 10 years. As we are speaking right now today, Xi Jinping and Putin have met for more than 40 times in a time span of 10 years, and probably more than 60 times in direct formats of talks. That means conversations between their closest advisors. What does that tell you is that this bifurcation might be not a deliberate process in itself, but because of the action of key players, and it was outlined at the system. Imagine the international relations as a pyramid. So at the top of it, at the systemic level, you have 3 key players. That's it. It's tragic. We don't like it, I don't like it, but don't shoot the messenger. And then we have, of course, this important, equally important regional layer, the meta layer, where all small, medium-sized, and big regional players are intertwined in various formats and constellations, and they are equally important. They are also important part. But the hierarchy, the natural order of things is this, that whatever these 3 great powers decide or not decide to do, this has direct or indirect impact on international relations, international organizations, and international law. That's the way it is. And so right now we are in the middle of this thing, in the middle of this process, where I argue that because of the dragon bear modus operandi, and this is not a strategic alliance by any means, so you won't find any definition for that, okay? But because of this modus operandi, we are in a unique situation. We have never had this unique situation before for, let's say, the last 250 years of the history of international relations, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So let's leave the Middle Ages aside. So we have a rise of China, we have a rise of India, we have a rise of a lot of global South powers in all continents, and then we have this modus operandi that is trying now to compete over the hearts and minds of the global South. They're trying to compete over the interpretation of legal norms. They're trying to create new legal norms that have nothing to do with the existing ones. And the skeleton of all of this are international organizations. So here's the good news for you. International organizations are here to stay. Yes, and next time when we come together, they will be still here, but they will be modified. So the dragon bear is penetrating the existing Western organizations for the sake of their own interests. If you take a look at the UN Security Council, you will find out, and I have counted it, I've conducted an empirical analysis. Since 1990s, they have coordinated their positions on almost all issues with 3 exceptions. Abstaining means actually in favor. So the same goes now for the regional organizations in emergence with dragon bear nature. BRICS was mentioned. So BRICS plus, because it's no longer just BRICS, it's BRICS plus. We already have, speaking of ASEAN centrality, we have already ASEAN countries also joining the club, with Indonesia that has become a member of BRICS plus in 2025, and there will be more queuing there. So again, you have an empirical proof of something that's new. It's a kind of a new situation of organizations emerging organically because of this new reality, because countries don't want to miss an opportunity. They want to be part of this. And India is the best example, because India is currently taking the best from both worlds, is participating in US-led organizations and institutions, and at the same time in China, Russia-led organizations such as for instance, the BRICS Plus, but also Shanghai Organization for Cooperation, so on and so on. So how are we going to, final sentence on my side, how are we going to, is there a Western response to that? I mean, the problem is, if you have the mindset, and I would argue that our political leadership right now and our institutional representation in general, I don't want to generalize, but that's my diagnosis, has a mindset of the past. It's not up to the task to really face a challenge like this, which is a unique systemic and structural challenge. So I think that our political and institutional leadership will be mostly preoccupied with themselves, with trying to kind of keep our own institutions ongoing, rather than actually say, okay, we need to adapt, we need to face the challenge, we need to do something else, we need to be more open to the needs of the rest of the world. And if that does not happen, and of course I know that my colleagues will disagree on some matters, there are also examples that point to the other direction, think of FTAs, but in general I think that there has to be a complete mindset shift, where if you think last week what the Indian, for instance, foreign minister said, we do not need preachers, we need practitioners.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I think it was also an excellent example of putting the final thoughts into the final summary. So Billy, just very quickly on your side, if it would be possible for you to answer the question in regards to what the UN really impactfully does, especially when it comes to the real crisis, and punishing offenders, I think was the exact word which was used. So if you could. And also
conclude, I guess.
Conclude. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I mean, I can listen to you like, whole day. I know, and I think we should make more time next time, so
Absolutely.
that we can really get into this in-depth discussions. It's very, very critical. I will be very, very short. You're my former colleague in the UN system, so what do I say to that? I think when it comes to hard powers within the UN, we just don't have them. This is it. And the reason is very simple. It's a member states-based organization. We, as UN member staff members, personnel, we don't make the decisions. We would like to make different decisions for sure. You know that. So, but we don't make the decisions. Member states make the decisions. So when it comes to the hard powers, punishing those perpetrators, zero. There's nothing. Okay, sorry to be very blunt on that, but that's what it is. Soft power, there's a lot, of course. I think this is where the value of the organization will continue to be, with the soft powers in terms of facilitating negotiations and reconciliation, empowering communities. This is quite critical because, again, we talked about the localization of the actions of the Pact for the Future. I think empowering communities, local communities, young people, women groups, other groups is critical because in the end, who are the governments? Who puts the governments in place? It's you. You are the ones who put governments in place. So I think if those communities are empowered well enough and democracy is functioning well enough, at least we have a chance that you can hold them accountable. So I guess the question comes back to you. I think this: what are you going to do to make sure that happens? And just to finally conclude, usually when I'm sitting here in your space, in your chair, I would ask the panelists, what gives you hope? What gives you hope? I mean, we've been speaking about many things that are very heavy. Seems like there's no future, there's no tomorrow, almost. I would ask usually this question. And I think if you didn't ask me this, but if you would ask me that question, I would say I would look in the audience. First of all, of course, I will look at my fellow panelists, for sure. But I will look mostly in the audience. And what do I see when I look in this audience? I see mainly young people. I don't know whether you're mostly DA students, I'm not sure, but it's mainly young people. And you are interested, as you started saying, you are engaging, you are learning, you are putting this conference together, you are acting, you're taking actions on these very important issues. So let me just conclude by saying that I am hopeful about the future. because I see a lot of interest in young people who have the biggest stake in the future, and who are certainly going to be, you are already the leaders, but certainly some of you will be future leaders, and you're going to continue driving these changes. So thank you so much for having invited me, and I hope I made at least a little small contribution to this. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, you did. Thank you so much, Billy. Just for the audience, the whole part was cut for time reasons. So maybe we can go down to even shorter answers, potentially one-sentence answers, because I think everyone's really curious about the summary of the day, and we have been really running over time. So to you, Mr. Deputy, we have been especially talking about Tuvalu, and you have been mentioning UNCLOS quite a lot, so I thought this was a fitting question. Okay. And then maybe you want to pick up on Billy's question. So sure. 2 sentences.
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
2 sentences. There's an ongoing legal norm creation in the International Law Commission, and that is on the permanence of baselines. So imagine if all these small island states are totally submerged in water due to sea level rise. Where do they go? What happens to their state? That's the basic question. And the consensus right now in the ILC is that they remain to be a state. The baselines that they have before they are fully submerged by in water remains the same. And because part of being a state, one of the elements of a statehood is, of course, territory. So if they don't have any territory, they do lose their statehood? The answer is no. That's the growing consensus now in the ILC. And the process in the ILC is that, it's more than 2 sentences already, is that it will be approved by the General Assembly of the UN. So I go back again to the beauty, importance of multilateralism, so that there are legal norms that are set in order to protect especially those who are disadvantaged.
Thank you so much, and really for keeping it also really down to the bare and the essential. Thank you. I guess that leaves the very last question, also an interesting one for you, Mr. Kornprobst, and it was, I have it here. Tuvalu climate change.
Marvin, I'm gonna.
P5, absolutely, okay. Of course. The shift of P5, and the final words of this panel belong to you. So thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. No, I think a way of answering that question, but all the others too, is so think about it. So if an international organization is supposed to work, then the institutional design has to work. That is one condition. Yeah, there's another one as well. That's one condition. That part of that is the finances. Yes. Yeah. Part of that is the institutional legitimacy. So is it actually in an organization like the United Nations, is it actually legitimate in the eyes of the member states if you have the permanent 5 and they obviously are a little bit more equal than the others? Then there's output legitimacy. So with this kind of arrangement, can you actually meaningfully address the crises of our times? Is that in international peace and security? Is that in global health? Is that in environment? The way with Tuvalu, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that is the one part. And the other one is the background. It's the mindsets, and so it's the ideas in the minds of people. And if everything is about geopolitics, if everything is about deterrence, then we probably are in dire straits. Yeah, in various parts of the world. India, Pakistan is the latest one. It's always interesting to juxtapose that to what else could be. Yeah? So if one thinks about the origins of the European Union, then that is really the idea that cooperation, integration breeds peace, and standing apart breeds war. Yeah. If one thinks of way back then, yeah, so introduction of the principle of sovereignty, basically by what now would be called international lawyers, yeah, Josius, Vattel and everything, they all had a notion of solidarity among states. So I thought, okay, this kind of state system, interstate system, cannot work without some kind of a measure of solidarity. And even the most hard-nosed writers and practitioners of diplomacy, they talked not only about raison d'etat, national interest, but also about the raison de système. So you have to take care of the system itself. Yeah? And that, at the moment, is really lacking. That's an important one. Yeah? And on that note, then I think quite a bit of things that Billy said that with appealing to you, yeah. So if it's also about learning to stick together and to do something together, then well, the great powers may not always listen, yeah. But we have to try, yeah. And then I think one silver lining on the horizon there is that with the great powers at some stage, I think there's also going to be some kind of learning going on again. I just hope that it doesn't require a major catastrophe for this kind of learning to happen, because this is what research shows. So the kind of deep learning, comprehensive learning, oftentimes happens after disasters. So hopefully we are more wise than that.
Well, we certainly are after this panel. Also, I've absolutely abused my position of power here to let you stay longer and discuss this issue, because I'm really, really interested. So thank you all very much from my side. Thank you, distinguished panel. Thank you, audience, for staying longer with us. We hope we didn't spoil your afternoon plans. We have one final big thing before us, and this is the summary of the conference.
Thank you so very much, Marvin. I promise I will not keep you long, but I would like to end this conference as all good diplomatic conferences end with a question of semantics. When we planned this conference, we discussed a lot about what the theme would be, and there's a good reason we didn't call this conference "Will Diplomacy Save the World?" Because as we heard today again and again, we live in uncertain times. As we heard in the panel on power politics, there has been a change of language and tone in international relations. And as we heard in the panel on climate crisis, even though we face an existential threat, multilateral fora often struggle to address it. As Ambassador Briggs said today in the workshop on crisis diplomacy, we face more and more complex crises than ever. And those most affected are still often not included in the discussions, be it the voices of youth, women, or people from the global south. But luckily for us, the question of today is not will diplomacy save the world, it's can diplomacy save the world. And as Billy so beautifully raised, this is a question of hope and of possibilities. Jules said this morning that diplomacy is a tool. And we heard in the panel about new technologies, that new technologies can serve as a way to bring these tools forward. And as we've just heard, even multiplexity has in it this opportunity. One outcome of the workshops today, of both workshops, is that short-time crises require long-term preparedness, and that means centering not only empathy, but agency. As Jana, one of our workshop hosts, said today, it's time to turn commitment into action. So can diplomacy save the world? I can't answer that question. I think we certainly cannot answer it after one day of conference, but we can certainly try. To refer back to Jules once again, diplomacy is more than shaking hands. It is action, whether in multilateral fora or on the street, or wherever you engage in international, multi-stakeholder projects, be it on a local, regional, or international level. Maybe the question is not if diplomacy can save the world, but maybe the question can serve for us to ask ourselves, both as practitioners and as students or aspiring students of international relations, how can we make sure that the diplomacy we take part in and the multilateral work we engage with aims to save the world? As Professor Kornprobst said, at least we have to try. And with that, I would like to close my closing remarks, and I will only keep you from our reception 1 second more for the round of thank yous. I really want to thank all the panelists and the workshop hosts for making this day possible, the diplomatic academic staff that has helped us so tremendously in the preparation of this, our sponsors, the City of Vienna, the International, Karl Ludwig, EF, the Club DA, the Embassy of the Philippines, and Sommerperle for supporting us in this conference, and of course, the lovely, lovely DASICON team that organized all of the students of this academy who took the time and effort to organize this conference, the project management team, Julia Diem and Kim Bergloff, the marketing team, Ilana Walker, Clara Brunstein, and Sonja Meyer, the incredible logistic teams, Henning Unheim and Konstantin Philipp, the speaker coordinator, Ferdinand Roniger, the sponsoring team, Astrid Steinöcker and Katrin Spielfolger, the moderators of today, who you've all seen, and the countless volunteers that have made this day possible. I spoke very fast, so you didn't have time to clap in between, because that would have taken even longer, but please join me in a round of applause for all the ones that made this day possible.